Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream. This is a series where I share the people that I know, the people that help me, the people who I know can help you get better. When I started as a tech leader 15 years ago, there wasn't a lot of help and support out there in the community. They weren't the books, the resources, the blogs, the live streams that exist nowadays. And so I had to learn everything the hard way. I had to become a tech leader from just trying things and making mistakes. Nowadays, we've got a lot of great resources out there, but there's still a whole heap of stuff that we need to talk about more. And that's what I do on this Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream. I pick the topics and the speakers that I think will give you the guidance you need to be better technology leaders, and I share them with you. And with me today, we have Shirley Ha. Welcome, Shirley. Welcome to the live stream. Tell the audience a little bit about you and tell them why we've chosen this topic of how to get your boss to listen to your ideas.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning. Hi, everyone. It's good to see everyone. So I'm Shirley. I'm currently a founder for my cybersecurity startup that's currently under redevelopment. My background comes from project management, mainly non-for-profits and in government. And so the topic today is of interest is because this is the webinar that I wish that I could go to at the beginning of my career, because this was something that I was never very good at, because it's something they don't tell you when you're at uni and at the start of your career, that when it comes to the working world, there's the people element and also the task element. So either one you're going to thrive more in, and one of the others you're going to find more challenging. So yeah.
And you need both,
and you need both, to do well at your job.
Exactly. And one of the things with universities is they're great at teaching you, the theory and the academic practice of things, but the real work world is very, very different. You get in there and you're like, why can't I just do the thing they taught me at uni? Why do I have to deal with all of these humans and these projects and these, biases and these, desires for people to succeed? It's like, I just want to do the thing that I'm good at and that I was taught to do. It can be quite a culture shock.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, let's kind of start off with a little bit of a reset on this thing we're discussing, which is, managing up, how to get your boss to listen to you. What are some of the common misconceptions that people have about this? If they're struggling, if they're like, I keep bringing my ideas to my boss, they keep ignoring me, or they're always choosing somebody else's ideas over my idea. What are the common misconceptions that people might have about what's going on in this situation?
Yeah, sure. I guess we've got to, with that question, we kind of got to define what is managing up. So essentially managing up, it's kind of when you're moving from like a passive team member or colleague to being a little bit more proactive, where you're being more like accountable for your own workload, your performance, and in the workforce. So you're essentially building your self-sufficiency to sort of assist your manager with their workload. So most of the more common misconceptions that people have about managing up, it's definitely telling your boss what to do, questioning their leadership. You're trying to overstep or take their role, or trying to get promoted quicker than they are, or it's just better to do as you're told and not question their leadership at all, which isn't really what it is anyway. It's just sort of having a more open conversation, dialogue about, you've been hired to do this role, you're here to solve problems, what can you do to help out the team? And I think when you have that mindset, I think you can avoid those tricky conversations and those blind corners when it comes to managing up your manager.
Yeah, there's a whole heap of stuff we can delve into with what you've just said, like this idea of ownership of outcomes. I think is something that is really important to kind of recognize. Is it's your job to own the outcomes of the role you're in, and you know, that's a leadership mindset which we try and encourage here. And part of that owning of the outcomes of your role is understanding that sometimes we have to manage up, sometimes we have to convince our boss to give us the things we need in order to, you know, get the outcome they've asked from us. It's you know, it's part of their expectation. Just before we get too deeply into this topic, this is of course a live stream. If you're watching this on replay, sorry, but if you are watching this live, please feel free to post questions on wherever you're watching this: LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and we will get those questions and cover them off. If you just want to say hi, just say hi. But if you have some questions and topics you want us to dive deeply into, just post them and we will cover them. So, like if you've got a situation where you're trying to, I guess, like manage up and manage your boss, every boss is different. You know, I've had bosses that want to know the minutia of everything I'm doing, and I've had bosses that are just like, Murph, that's the problem, go solve it. And I've had bosses that are like, I don't even want to tell you what the problem is. You need to tell me what the problem is. So, you know, like there's all of these different types of leadership styles. How does the way you manage up kind of change and you know, affect? How do those leadership styles affect the way you manage up to your boss?
Yeah, it definitely plays into it, but I guess it also depends like what stage of your career that you're at. I think if you're at the beginning of your career, you sort of just got to adapt to whatever leadership style that they have because you're at the start of your career. I think once you're more like more senior and more like moving along your career, I think you kind of can get a sense of their working styles when you're at the interview, because you can sort of start asking a few questions just to sort of get a sense of what their working style is like, because by that point you would kind of know like what sort of management style brings out the best in you. And I think that also will help you make an informed decision whether or not like this company, this team, this role is the best fit for you. But I'm assuming that you went into the role and you've found out that their working style, leadership style is a little bit different to what you're accustomed to. I think with any change, like it takes time to sort of settle into the change. It also takes time to build rapport and to like build that stakeholder engagement with your manager. There's definitely not one size that fits all, but I think what's definitely helpful is sort of like reading the situation. Just because your previous manager was like that doesn't mean your next manager is going to be like that. So you kind of just have to adapt to the situation. But I think like after a period of time, if you're finding that their working style is really like preventing you to perform the best that you can, I think at that point that is time to have that conversation, to sort of frame it in a way like, these are the things that you've identified in your career that you need to succeed and thrive, to operate at your optimum level. And then I think once you sort of bring that to the table, I think that kind of takes away the conversation like you're blaming your manager for the reason why you're not performing well. You're just bringing to the table like, this is what I need to perform well. What are your thoughts on this? And sort of let the conversation flow from there. Because I think generally managers are a little bit more open to new ideas when they feel like it's their idea in the first place.
That's not managers. That's all humans. Yeah, we've talked about that a few times on the live stream. The IKEA effect. If you ever want to know the cognitive bias that's underlying that kind of overweighting the things that we think we've come up with, it's called the IKEA effect. There's a bunch of great research on that. So I guess like implicit in one of the things you're talking about there is the importance of building trust with your boss, and how you've said they need to not feel like it's coming from you wanting to get promoted quicker than them. Like you've mentioned this kind of implicitly a couple of times, so let's kind of touch on it explicitly. The role of trust in managing up. What would you say is that important? Is it not that important? Like how do you think about trust in these scenarios?
I think trust, again, it takes time to build. If you're lucky to have a manager that is very open and transparent from you from day one, well, then you're in luck. But most of the time we're paired up with managers where you're still getting to know them, they're still getting to know you. So it just takes time to sort of build that level of trust. Yeah, and but I've been fortunate where there are some managers where they sat down with me within like the first 3 months, or like during probation, to sort of ask me like, where do I want to go career wise? Like, what can they do to help me to get to where I want to go? But I've also been in situations where, yeah, I felt like when I was trying to essentially be a good team player, where my managers sometimes felt that I was trying to like overstep or like get promoted faster, which wasn't the case. Like I was just keen to learn. So I guess it's kind of I guess reading the room and just being really clear. And sometimes what is clear to you may not actually be that clear to the other person. So I guess looking back, if I could go back in time in those situations, I would actually just explicitly say to my manager, like, look, I'm simply just here because I really just want to learn more. I'm not here to try to like overstep or like try to jump the promotion because I still have so much to learn. And I think when sometimes people just need to hear that, because sometimes I actually had managers where instead of them coming to me explicitly to tell me this is how they were feeling, they just started to withhold work from me, which wasn't ideal. But I also feel like if you're in a company like that, that's also a sign of not a very good company culture, because you obviously would want to work in an environment where there are open conversations about the easy things, but also the difficult things too. Because if it doesn't get talked about, it just festers, and then it leads to people, having to move, and they might not necessarily want that.
Yeah, I think that kind of transparency of motives between you and your boss is super important in this, because if you and your boss are kind of questioning or doubting each other's motives and what you're trying to achieve, it kind of makes this whole process 10 times more difficult. Your boss has to know what your goals are and the things that you're trying to achieve, and you've got to know what your boss's goals are and what your boss is trying to achieve, because that's the only way you can really help each other and not worry that you're trying to work against each other.
Yeah,
how do you kind of start those conversations? Like, is it something that just naturally evolves, or have you got like a way you like to kind of start having those conversations?
I think in the early days of my career, I was very terrible at doing this. So I would always start like very like slowly to sort of like talk around the fact that I felt that I wasn't getting enough work. So I would say things like, oh, just letting you know, I've completed this deliverable and blah, blah, blah. Just letting you know I've got capacity to further assist, just to make it really clear that I've got availability to help. And eventually the conversation does steer towards that I'm actually not getting enough workload and I really want to help out the team. And I think by that point, well, they kind of just, well, the team is overwhelmed. Yes, it makes sense to actually give you the work. Whereas now, more settled into the career path, I feel like, again, like if it's something that I had to learn the hard way, to speak up early and often, because I feel like when you don't speak up early and often, it kind of just sets the pattern and it kind of just like sets the norm. That's how it's always going to be. And it's kind of like if you don't say something, they're just going to assume everything is fine. And even if that's not the case, like even if it's not the case, they don't necessarily know it, because going back to different manager styles, like some managers are very task oriented, so as long as the work is getting done in their minds, their employees are happy and like everything is toggling along. But that may not always be necessarily true. There are some managers that I've had where like they manage to do the difficult thing of balancing both the task and the person. So they can always tell that even if things are getting delivered, that there's something going on in the back end. But then it also comes down to your career, like self-accountability, because no one is really responsible for your career and whether or not you're happy or not, like, because it's up to you to kind of drive where you want to go and to speak up when things aren't working and when things are working, because no one's really going to do that for you, because at the end of the day, you're hired there to solve problems. And if you don't sort of speak up, like, they're just going to assume that everything is fine. And you can always And obviously, if it's not a good culture fit, they can also go out to like find new people. But hence why it's important to speak up early and often, because if you want to stay, you want to avoid that situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you made around, it's your career, you've got to own your career. And, I think one of the mistakes that people can make is forgetting that, to you, your career is the most important thing. You are the most important thing because you're you, so you care about that a lot. But to your boss, as much as they might be a caring boss, as much as they might want you to succeed, you are one of 5, 10, 15 people that report into them, that they support. And so, you are not the only thing that they are thinking about. Like, as much as they might be caring, helpful bosses, they've got a whole bunch of stuff that they've got to take care of. And, it's very easy for the people who are maybe a little bit more quiet, the people who are maybe, don't show up as much, don't ask questions as much. It's really easy for those sorts of people to just kind of get forgotten about, because if you don't make noise, if you don't ask your bosses these kinds of questions, then somebody else that's louder, somebody else that's kind of is that type of person will do so. We've just lost Shirley, so hopefully she will reconnect. I'm guessing she's just having internet problems. This is a great chance for me to solicit questions. Oh, Shirley, you're back. Welcome.
It just beated me up. So sorry. You've been telling me like very valuable things. So you're saying that to your boss, you're one of the 5.
Exactly.
There's other
Exactly.
people. Yep.
Yeah, and as much as they might care about you and want you to succeed, you're just one of their team, and your career is never going to be as important to them as it is to you. So like
Yeah.
you have to take ownership over that. We've got a question comment from Alex. Hey Alex, I've noticed that often the transparency in goals and personal objectives is not equal, i.e. asymmetry is information. It's not always that your manager will tell you what they really have in mind. They will always be shielding, or there's something political that's unsaid. So it's about building trust, but I also think sometimes we have to read between the lines. This also varies a lot from the company culture and size. I think it's not just company culture. It can be, the country you're in, the cultural background you're from. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Shirley, about, it's sometimes you can't build the trust. Sometimes you have to read between the lines and the kind of cultural differences. Sorry, Alex, amazing comment. I'm going to unhide it purely because it's kind of hiding Shirley and us behind the words. But let's talk about this.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. Thanks, Alexandria. Like I think it goes back to reading the room as well, because my career path has spanned from like non-for-profits, governments, universities, and startups. Like I've had the opportunity to observe different cultures. So some of them are really great and some of them are not so great. But I think it's also when you are in situations where the culture isn't the best, there are always pockets of really good people to talk to. Like just because it's not great in one part of the organization, it doesn't mean the entire organization is like that. I feel like with transparency, like if it's not there, it's nothing you can really do. But what you can do is lead by example. And also, I think if you are unfortunately in a work environment where it is very political, it is really difficult to get things completed and very difficult to engage with stakeholders. I think what would have been really helpful for me back in the day would be kind of to go to this webinar and kind of realize you need to kind of have like an end date in mind, but also an action plan, because even though there are some aspects of the organization that may not be the best, there are still other things that you could look into before you tap out and leave. And I think that's definitely one of the biggest learning lessons that I've learned from my early days of career. Just because you leave a certain organization, it doesn't mean the problems don't carry along. Because I've actually had that happen before, where I've left organizations because of the political issues, and then I found myself in a new organization and it was the same thing. So you can't really run away from your problems. It's really just changing your perspective and how you, I guess, cope with it. I also think this stems into this is something I wish someone else told me in my early days of my career, is to sort of build a life outside of the office when you are in that environment, to make sure that you do have like hobbies and activities to kind of help bring that balance between work and life outside the office. Because yeah, we really do, even though we work from home these days, we spend more time in the office than we do anywhere else.
Yeah, I love that point around, different company cultures and the problems following you, because I think it can be useful. Like if you're at a point in your career where you're getting a bit frustrated for some reason, then it can be really useful to kind of look at what are the commonalities between where you're getting frustrated, because it could be that you're doing the same role in different companies, and therefore you're hitting the same frustrations because those frustrations are inherent in the role that you're doing. Or it could be that you're doing kind of different types of roles in the same type of company. So you've worked in, banks, and then you've worked in superannuation, and then you've worked in, some other financial services. And so, those things you're finding frustrating are actually nothing to do with a company. They're just inherent in a large financial services company of that size. And so, just because you're finding something frustrating, it doesn't mean that that isn't going to follow you. And of course, the third layer on that is that the problem could be you.
I was just going to say that too. No, I think the universe is very intuitive in the way of just because you move somewhere doesn't mean the problem will be resolved, because it's something that you still need to learn. So I think that's something that I've definitely, ever since becoming a founder, like whether or not I enjoy the job at the time or the company, every day, like I pull something out of that place that I worked at that actually applies to me now. So, but it's not something you can see. Hindsight is 20/20 too, right?
Yeah.
So even the
Yeah.
jobs that you don't like, even the jobs that you love, like they all feed into your career path.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I've had some shocking jobs in the past that have just been horrendous, and there's just been a complete mismatch of me and the company culture, or me and my boss, and it's been awful while I've been in that situation. But then looking back and reflecting on it, there's always been something that I've learned from that. Even if it's something about me and the way that I work, and things that I can look back on, like you said, with hindsight, and go, oh, if I'd have done this differently, things might have been different. But I think there's a bit of a trap in that, which is, we can't go back. We can't
No,
redo
you
those
can't.
things.
No, you can't. But what you can do, though, Andrew, is kind of go, I approve of the lesson, I just don't approve of the method. So if I want to
Yeah,
teach the
yeah.
same thing, I'll just use a different method.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And accepting that we're not perfect as humans. We're fallible. We have our flaws, and the that understanding that there just because we have this flaw doesn't mean we need to absolve responsibility of it, but also doesn't mean we have to kind of take full accountability. I often say there's lots of things about me that I wish were not the case, and what I don't do is say, sorry, you've got to live with it. I go, okay, we've got to work out how we can mitigate those problems. Like I know that I'm not the most organized person in the world, and so I have an assistant, and my assistant helps me be more organized because I know that I am not organized. Cool. All right. Alex has just said project manager mindset talking. Yes, I think that's shining through, Shirley. I definitely definitely agree with that comment.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's kind of talk about in the moment when we're kind of handling this sort of situation. Have you ever been in situations where there's lots of different stakeholders involved, and you've got maybe your boss, you've got your boss's boss, you've got your boss's peer, and you've got a whole bunch of people. How do you kind of put your ideas forward in a way that resonates in a diverse audience?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I kind of like liken it to, there's too many cooks at the stove. everybody wants to put their ingredient in, and it might overcook the pot, if that makes sense. I think when you're in that situation, I think it goes back to like, who are the key decision makers? Who are we working to deliver this for, and sort of go back to that. I think in the essence of team culture, obviously everyone having their own opinion and they're voicing their ideas is important, but at the end of the day, whoever the key decision owner is, whoever the project owner is, like, they're the ones that need to make sure that like it's staying within scope, for lack of a better word. And kind of going from there. And I think with most of the time, like especially with like project management, I think everybody just wants to be heard. Like, I think they know that like all their ideas are not going to be implemented. I think they just want to be heard. And I think if you create that environment, whether or not their idea gets implemented, like, that's fine, because you've already solved the problem of their idea was heard.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, it can be really difficult to influence multiple people in one meeting with this kind of stuff, because you've got all of those diverse things that they care about, the things that they want to see. And so, yeah, you're right. One of the ways to do that is just to go, well, I'm just not going to, I'm going to pick the most influential one or two people and kind of focus on them and pitch and try and convince them. Another way that I found helpful is actually to do a lot of legwork before that. And, if I know I've got a one-on-many meeting coming up, I will actually proactively have one-on-one meetings with the other people before that. I ideally, if I've got a one-on-many meeting, I want to know that I've got those stakeholders on board before that meeting. I do that by having one-on-ones.
Getting stakeholder buy-in, like, it absolutely helps when you're trying to push in new ideas.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Let's touch on that new ideas thing. So, I'm sure a lot of the audience and people watching, they've worked in places, I know I have, where it's a very risk-averse culture. Maybe they've worked in enterprise, in government, in healthcare. All of these places, people are very directly not incentivized to do better. They're just incentivized to not do worse. And so, they don't really want to take risks. They kind of, just want to keep doing the things they've always done. What's your kind of tips and tricks for dealing with those risk-averse cultures, or cultures that resist change and have all of these politics? How do you kind of still get your ideas heard in those situations? Oh, I'm guessing Shirley's trying to find a place with a better internet connection.
Sorry, Andrew, I'm just trying to find a place where connection is better. Okay, just give me a moment to reset. I just realized this part of the apartment, the study desk isn't sitting, is a lot better. Because I'm like, why is the signal dropping out? I'm like, oh, because very good signal.
It's funny. We're in 2025. You'd think these problems would all be solved by now. If you're watching this on the replay, this is why we edit the videos on the replay. I'm not going to edit it this time. You're going to get to watch it this time.
Okay, I think it should be more stable now. Sorry, Andrew, what was the question?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this idea of risk aversion and cultures that are kind of resistant to change. I'm sure a lot of the audience works in healthcare, in financial services, in government, where people there are actively not incentivized to do better. They're only incentivized not to do worse. And so, there's kind of these cultural things in the organization that kind of discourage change. How would you kind of go about trying to encourage people to listen to your ideas and to kind of take things on board when everything in the culture is incentivizing them not to?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it kind of goes back down to like, people are creatures of habit, and it's kind of like, if it's always been done that way, it just makes sense to keep doing it that way, even if it's not efficient or it doesn't work for us. I think with any change, though, I think incremental change is usually the path to least resistance because it's so incremental. Eventually, it will just compile, and then the change that you're trying to achieve then is implemented. But when you're trying to implement like a fast change that's completely like pivoting from where the organization's current has, if you're trying to pivot the change where like the organization has always done things that way and you're trying to do a 180, like yeah, you're definitely going to be met with resistance. But I think this comes down to change management again. So stakeholder buy-in, getting a team of people to support your idea will always help the process move along a little bit quicker. I've also learned that like it is impossible to keep everyone happy. So as long as you can keep the majority happy, the key stakeholders, the buy-ins for the project sponsors, whoever's responsible for leading the change, it does make it a little bit easier. I think when you don't have executive buy-in, then that makes it inherently difficult. Because I remember a couple of years ago, I worked for a state government agency where, so every year in government, they have people fill out a People Matter survey. So this is an internal like HR anonymous survey. They say it's anonymous, but I still think they can identify you because of the demographics at the end. But anyway, so this survey is to kind of, it's like a pulse test to see how things are toggling along within the agency. Are there things that are working, and are there things that they should be concerned about, and are there things that aren't working? And I think one of the years that I was there for this organization, I think burnout was a very like key area of concern. So obviously when like the managers went back to their teams to kind of like talk about the survey results, so burnout was mentioned that this is a key area of concern, but there wasn't really much follow-up like from flagging that key area of concern. So when I sort of flagged it like, well, is there something that we can do to like kind of like, you know, address that? Because it's not just our team that is saying that burnout is an issue, especially in IT. Like it seems to be across the board. And I think during that time, like I was still sort of learning the ins and outs of managing up and like bringing up ideas. Basically, it was just, oh, that's just how it is. And this is why you take annual leave. And I was kind of like walking away from the conversation. I'm like, that's not a very good it's not a very good response to kind of be told that that's just how it is and that's why you take annual leave. Obviously, taking annual leave is, you know, important part of, and this is the benefit of when you are an ongoing employee or fixed term contract, but it doesn't fix the problem. So basically what I did in this situation, I was kind of like, well, if inherently within like the organization they're not really at the point where they're open to have this open dialogue about our staff are being burnt out, what can we do to start like, you know, putting in like proactive and preventative measures to make sure that our staff aren't getting burnt out, because obviously this affects company morale, turnover and whatnot. So basically what I did was I went to I think like a leadership webinar that was like open to like anyone, and anyone, didn't matter what your role was. And I asked one of the CISOs, so the Chief Information Security Officers, about his thoughts about burnout. So his response was a lot better. He actually like listened to like my question about the concerns about when an organization like is like reaching that point where the staff are saying they're burnt out, but like there's nothing really being done. Like, what do you do in that situation? He kind of explained to me in a way that, yeah, like burnout, it's not a band-aid fix. Just because you go on leave doesn't fix the problem, because you go on leave, you're refreshed and you're relaxed, but then you come back and the problem's still there. So you need to build in like daily routines and like activities to make sure that you're essentially decanting like your level of stress so you don't reach that level of burnout. Yes, but again, so I didn't get to stay in this organization, so I don't know like where they went on their their journey to address their issue of having high burnout rates in their organization. But yeah, that's just an example of like, yeah, when I try to bring up a new idea, that was the response that I got. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that that thing you mentioned at the end about not knowing where they ended up. That's one of the things I find most frustrating about being a leader is, moving between organizations and all of the projects, the cultural changes, the people, and just kind of, you can never know if the thing you did had a large impact on the organization. And especially, when you're not there anymore, you don't know whether the butterfly effects of the things you said actually had an impact. It can be quite frustrating sometimes, but yeah, somebody listened, somebody heard you, and hopefully by having that
You can.
conversation with somebody in the executive level, they had that conversation
Yeah,
with
I
somebody
think.
else, and
Mm,
yeah, it's hard to
mm,
know.
mm. Yeah, I think
Um,
the important thing is as long as you start a conversation and not a fire, I feel like that's kind of the way to do it when it comes to change.
Yeah, and finding those advocates as well. If you've got somebody who can fight the fight with you, it's kind of a lot easier to get cultural change.
Mm,
You don't want to be the only
yeah,
person,
absolutely.
waving the banner. You want other people along the ride with you. Uh, okay, so let's kind of touch on the next topic of this. So you know let's talk about confidence. Let's talk about, people who are maybe early in their careers, they're just starting off, they kind of feel like, what do I know? I'm a 25-year-old, 27-year-old. I'm early in my career. My boss doesn't seem to be giving me what I need to succeed, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I shouldn't need this. Maybe my boss is right, and they just get all of this imposter syndrome. They lack in confidence. What would you say is kind of the advice you've got for people in that situation? How can they kind of deal with managing up when they're kind of struggling with confidence in themselves and who they are?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things that you can do. I think in my early days of my career, I listened to a lot of career podcasts where like they would talk about topics like this. I would also read like a lot of career books. Yeah, I think there's one called Ask a Manager, so it walks you the ins and outs of basically in every possible question that you could have. It's in that book. There is a segment too in that book about managing up as well. But I also feel like I'm reaching out to your professional connections to sort of talk about what it is that you're struggling with. During my early days of my career, like I went to a lot of meetups. One of them that I've been going to since 2020, they're like a agile lean coffee group. And yeah, and to this day, even if I do have any career questions, like they're always happy to take it on board and come back with their views and their expertise. I think if you are struggling though to kind of find the confidence to kind of have these tricky conversations, it's kind of cliche, but practice makes perfect. So I feel like if you're not feeling that confident about what you're trying to get across to your manager, it always helps practicing with someone that you trust so they can give you open feedback about what it is that you're trying to get across. And then I think the more you do it, the more easy it will become. At the end of the day, though, I kind of liken it to like a student teacher mentality. So when you're a student and if you're struggling, if you don't speak up and tell your teacher or your lecturer, they're not going to know that you're drowning. So I feel like if you kind of view it in that mindset, it's going to make the conversation a lot less like pressure because you're essentially coming to your manager with something that you're struggling with, but you want to get help to like make it better. And ultimately getting that resolved is just going to resolve to like better productivity, like better outcomes, better deliverables, which ultimately reflects on them. So I don't think any manager is ever going to not want a team member who's who's operating at their optimal, and they want to do everything that they can to do that because it's going to also lighten their workload.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think just to reiterate what you said about, I guess, these networking, meetups, those kinds of communities. Sometimes you can get in this cycle of somebody early in your career because you don't have experience. You start questioning, is this a me problem, or is this an org problem? Like, am I at fault for this? Should I need this? Should I not need this? And it's really hard for you to answer those questions when you're early in your career, because you just legitimately don't have the experience to answer those questions. And those communities, those meetups can be great places for you just to say to somebody, hey, this is a situation I'm in. Is this a me problem, or is this a my boss problem? And they're getting the kind of outside perspective can be really useful, because there'll be people in those communities who've been doing the job you're doing for 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe even 30 years. And they can kind of say, yeah, sorry mate, this sucks, this is a pretty common problem and you're just going to learn to deal with it. Or they can go, nah, like, you need to you need to do something here, because it's a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think seeking guidance in any stage of your career is always a smart idea.
Yeah. It's one of the things we talk about often on this live stream, is kind of having that kind of bench of advisors, and whether they're coaches, mentors, supporters, advocates, sponsors, just having that bench of people you can go to. And your boss is obviously brilliant at what they're doing, which is why they became the boss normally, and they've got a heap of things that they can give you advice on, but they're just one person. And having this kind of bench of people you can go to and ask different things not only gives you different perspectives on the same problem, but gives you different ranges of experiences. Somebody I used to work with called it the Voltron of leaders. It's the robot that becomes the bigger robot because of all of the smaller robots. It's
Very
like
cool.
that's what you're kind of looking for, is you've got all these little people that help you, who become this big coach that one person could never be, because they're made of all these different other people. So we're rapidly reaching the end of the hour here. It always surprises me how quickly that happens. So we've really only got time for one more question. Time to get it in if you've got it. Alex has posted something else. So this is back to what we're talking about with one-on-ones. If you're having those one-on-ones, it's not always best to sell your idea. You can listen and pivot. I think that's really important, Alex, to mention. Those one-on-ones are not just about you trying to hard pitch. The goal is to solve the problem, and listening to what the other person says is crucial. Like, I think the benefit of doing it the way you're advocating here is you're getting those objections out in a one-on-one situation rather than in the one-on-many situation. And those objections are kind of easier to listen to, easier to handle, and kind of nicer to get in a one-on-one than if they're kind of all being thrown at you in the one-on-many meeting. Cool. Okay, we have reached the end. I think it's time to start wrapping up, Shirley.
Thanks again for everyone's patience with my technical difficulties. And thanks, Andrew, for waving your editing magic.
Yeah. We will see how much I edit out, Shirley, and how much gets left in. Sometimes it's funnier to leave it in.
Sure, I don't need probably for real, but thanks for having me. I really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, me too. This has been a great talk. So let's kind of finish. So next on the live streams coming up in about a month's time, we've got Erwin and I are going to talk about product metrics for engineering managers. I think this is one of my favorite topics. I think so often as kind of people in the technology industry, we focus a lot on the what it is we're doing, and we kind of lose sight of the why. And I think kind of touching on those, like, what is the software actually doing? What are the things we're measuring, and how does that work? I think is a really interesting topic. So Erwin and I are gonna talk about that in July. I'm really looking forward to that. As for if you've liked this, if you want to know more about what I do at Tech Leaders Launchpad, best thing is to subscribe to my newsletter, which will let you know where I am in the world, what events I'm running, and what the next live stream is. There's a newsletter every month that has a bunch of great resources around technology leadership, as well as an article that I've written, as well as kind of linking you to the next live stream. I'm also doing a bunch of in-person workshops, actually, physically in meet space as opposed to virtual space. I'm running a bunch of workshops around Australia and New Zealand on these types of topics, on technology leadership, difficult conversations, influence, that kind of stuff. If you want to know more about those, that's the first QR code there. Shirley, where do you want to send people? Is there anything you want people to know about you? Anywhere you want to send them? If they like the stuff you talked about, if they want to know more about you, if they want to kind of follow what you've been doing.
Yeah, they can follow me on LinkedIn, but I'll also, after this wraps up, I'll also send you a list of the resources that I mentioned, so you can put it in the description.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, definitely do that. I think there's a whole heap of great stuff that Shirley has talked about that we definitely need to make sure we're kind of sharing with the audience. Like those books you mentioned, the stuff we went through. I'm going to start doing this. It's something I've not done well, because I talk about books all the time and talk about articles all the time. And I kind of forget to go back and put them in the description of the video. So I'm gonna make myself a promise to go back through all of the old live streams and do that, because I do need to get better at doing that. Cool. All right. Once again, thank you very much, Shirley, for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for coming and watching and asking questions. And we will see you next time on Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream. Goodbye,
Thanks
everybody.
for having me. Bye, everyone. Bye.